Hello everybody, Garrett here. I just thought I'd do a quick response to a video that Plowboy's Ghost just put out, and it was not a political video at all. It was a video on why he prefers the 4570, and I have to agree, the 4570 is definitely one of my favorites as well, edged out only slightly these days by the 5070. I don't know why. I just enjoy that cartridge a little more. But yes, as far as modern ammo, go to the store and pick it up. 4570 will do the job on anything in North America. Like say Hornady Levolution, woo! Put those things in 4570 and you'll smoke a 30-06 most of the time. That thing is really moving on and will take just about anything in North America. It will take anything in North America. I'm confident in it. But that was not the part of the video I want to talk about. He did an excellent job there. He did an excellent job with the whole video. But at the end of the video, he talked about a little movie called Hostiles. And I love to pick on that movie, mostly because it's set in 1892 and the whole premise of the movie is just stupid, because just kind of like 1883. Why don't you just take the train? You don't think the military can afford to send these guys up north on a train? If I mean, looking at history, all the natives being captured were going south to Oklahoma on trains way before that. And in 1892, there was a train running right by my house in little Podone, Kansas. So you know what? That's the whole philosophy of the movie is wrong to start with. Whoever wrote it basically wanted to spread the message. And there are some things you can enjoy in it, the firearms, this and that, you know, but it seems like, is it just me, or has every Western made a dark tale spreading the message nowadays as far as is concerned with the natives? Now don't get me wrong, I've made a whole video out there. Go check out my Little Bighorn and retrospective video. Don't get me wrong, I'm not taking sides one way or the other. I said in that video that we can't look at history through modern lenses and expect to see something or feel what the people back then felt. You can't do it because you're not living in the situations those people on either side were living in back then. But nowadays it seems like all the Westerns lean way over to one direction. Now I'm not saying that it's always been that way. In the 1920s and 30s, all the Westerns leaned way over in this direction, where the government and the horse soldiers could do no wrong. But it's clear around today where it leans way over there. There's not one good white person in the entire American West, and they should have just never, ever moved out there, and they should have never, ever tried to colonize or settle any of it. And of course, this is being made by a bunch of weirdos in Hollywood. And I can say this because this is my own channel, and I don't mind getting a little bit of heat. Come at me. They're made by a bunch of weirdos in Hollywood who live out there on land taken from natives. If they want to give it back, let them start. You know, I grew up around the real deal natives. I grew up around somebody named Charlie Little Coyote, who's the grandson of Black Kettle, and he was a full-on chief in the Cheyenne. And he would have flat out told you too. His favorite movies were the old movies. Now, the reason why, there's one movie that really got him, and that was them riding across where all the buffalo had been killed, Dances with Wolves. But he was a proponent of the old John Wayne movies, and he was best friends with my grandpa when they were growing up. My great-grandpa, actually. Movies really nailed it, really started nailing it in the 50s and the 60s, where they were getting away from that era of, well, it's all one side is correct as far as Custer never did anything wrong, or these generals never did anything wrong, and every native out there is the bad guy. And we kind of got away from that, but we hadn't gone full-blown the other direction where we have to make every single white person in these movies look stupid, right? The reason it was the perfect era in my mind for Western movies is because the older directors knew, take for instance John Ford, grew up around or knew people who were homesteaders, civilians, you know, in that time, or their parents were. And the one movie that I have to say absolutely nails it, as far as it does a good job of addressing racism, and at the same time can tell a great story and give you some sympathy for both sides, is The Searchers. Now, when I say does a great job, I mean the story of what the woman we call Luke, or Look, in that show, but they call her Luke. That poor woman just got the raw end of the deal, and it was bad what happened to her. And yet at the same time, there is not a more terrifying scene, for me anyway, in cinema history than what we call the Red Sky scene, which is right off the bat, where the quail are flying. This poor family's alone in Texas. If you've never seen it, I encourage you. You have to see it. The most raw emotions, I have to say, I still to this day I get chills when I see that scene, because this poor family is going through it in Texas. They know what's coming. They know they can't avoid it. They know they've been caught in a situation that no one should ever be caught in, and they just know what's going down, and there's no way they can get away from it at this point in time. And that happened in real life a lot, especially where I live. I was just accounting where 40 white civilians were killed in 1873 from me to the Oklahoma border, which is 15 miles. And a lot of people had to come live in little stockades that they built. And that will breed something in a person that modern movie makers will never understand. When you get people around you, your friends, the only people that you don't have cell phones or phones to talk to people out east, the only people you've known for years, the people who are helping you settle the land around you, all of a sudden start dying in horrific ways, and not because of something they did, because of something that the stupid government at the time had broken a promise, or something else like that, something that these government policies are being enacted on the Indians. But at the same time, the Indians are coming through and just slaughtering your friends. I want you to think about your mother hanging upside down over a fire, or your father, a green fire. And this is not something that's just made up today or made up in the 20s or 30s. A green wood fire and being roasted alive. They had ways of torturing people. Babies, women, children, it didn't matter. Now that happened on both sides, obviously. But the natives took particular care and had particular good time, shall we say, killing a lot of people. And like I said, I'm not going to be able to get into one side or the other. I'm not looking at it through the eyes of someone who is living today. I'm not doing that, because you can't understand it. You can't even come close to the fear and the desperation of people on both sides at the time. I'm going to read you a little something here. This might take just a minute. Alright, so you've seen me do a video the other day about the 1800s schoolhouse. Forest City Church stood directly to the southeast of that school in that video. And this is the story of Phoebe Rogers Gibson. And she wrote this actually in 1929, but I just want you to understand what people went through. We were living in our new house in about June the 10th or 15th. Dick Woodward came riding up and said, "Mr. Rogers, we must get out of here. The Cheyenne are on the warpath and have already killed a lot of people near Medicine Lodge on Cedar Creek." My father knew that this was no false alarm coming from Mr. Woodward. While Mr. Woodward went on to his house to get his family, we loaded in what we needed and left in a big hurry. We went across the Medicine Lodge River north to the highest point southwest of where Forest City Church now stands. There were about 60 people gathered there with their wagons and teams, and they made a corral of their wagons and put the women and children inside the enclosure, and we camped that night. The men stood watch all night long. During the night and several nights that followed, the hills to the south of us were lighted by the signal fires of the Indians. The next day, the men divided up their work, and some of them stayed there, made a ditch and watched the camp, while the others took their teams down to the river and cut the giant cedar trees. They plowed a couple furrows around a 60-foot square and made a ditch 2 feet deep and 2 feet wide. In this they stood tree trunks that the men cut on end close up like boards, then banked about 4 feet high around this. We had one wagon gate, and there was another gate with a little hallway so that if the Indians attacked, they would have to come through that gate, one at a time, and this gate was guarded all the time. Each family had a little booth to live in. There were about 10 families that made up their homes in that little 60-foot square. They built these booths with wagon sheets, tents, boards, or just anything they could get their hands on. The making of the stockade and booth took days. During this time, every morning, some of the men would go out and kill a buffalo that supplied us with fresh meat, and the tallow was used for butter to cook with. They hauled our water from the river in barrels. We were there for about a week before the United States Cavalry troops came down. They were a wonderful sight for we children to see. They patrolled between Medicine Lodge and Lake City. The Indians never attacked our little stockade, but Dr. Bond, who lived between Lake City and us, would not come into the stockade and had boasted that he would kill all the Indians there were around with his pegging awl. But one morning he started to Lake City and a band of the Indians saw him and attacked him. He threw himself on the side of his pony and started shooting at them. The troopers who were camped at Lake City heard the shooting and started to his rescue. The Indians heard them coming and got off into the hills. After that, Dr. Bond gladly stayed inside our little stockade. The Indians who had been making these raids were camped on Sand Creek, northeast of Medicine Lodge, unknown to the settlers. About 10 days after the raid west of town, the militia ran into them, and a fight ensued. We don't know how many were killed, but I remember that Frank McAllister, our neighbor, killed an Indian chief and took all his trappings, and when he returned he had 3 fresh Indian scalps on his belt, and of course, childlike, I ran over and examined them. These things settled down after a while, but we were not allowed to leave the stockade, and there we lived until it was safe for us to return to our farm. During that summer, we children had to amuse ourselves as best we could. As long as we stayed in sight, we could find ant hills covered with Indian beads that the ants had carried in, and we could see teepees all along the river. We found lots of pottery and arrowheads and shells and things that the Indians had left. We lived in our little stockade until the winter of 1874. So 6 months they stayed in that little 60 by 60 foot stockade. And the story goes on, and there's great stories about that place. Like I said, if you guys want to see more about that, go check out my little 1800 schoolhouse video. The schoolhouse was built just down the hill across the creek from the church, and that was, you can see the spot right over the hill when I look out the windows in that video where that little stockade would have stood. But the kind of fear that was developed, and maybe not even fear so much as desperation of people at the time. I guarantee you, if you throw people out of their house today and make them go live 10 families in a 60 by 60 foot stockade for 6 months with the fear of being killed every day and every night knocking on their front door, that'll breed something into people that won't go away for generations. And guess what? That's just the way the world works. You can't look at me today and tell me that all the whites were bad and they constantly rode through and did terrible things and the natives never did anything wrong. And you can't tell me the opposite way. This is where I'm probably going to get into a lot of trouble, but you want to know the 3 people that caused most of that trouble back then, that caused those people to live in that 60 by 60 foot stockade? Their names are Grant, Sherman, and Sheridan. And they've been doing that kind of stuff for a long time. Don't you think it's funny when Sherman and Sheridan ride to one sea and through the South? That's just called warfare. But when 10 years later they ride to the other sea through a whole bunch of other native peoples and then a bunch of people that get killed and everything else and their land taken from them, well, that's called genocide. It's the same people doing the same scorched earth warfare that they've been doing for 15 years at that point. And they had gotten away with it the first time and they got away with it the second time. But the poor farmers out there and the poor people just trying to make a living off the dirt that had already been there for 10 years at that point, they had to take the brunt of that. There wasn't no natives coming to Washington, D.C., so Grant's peace policy could be implemented all over the West with no fear that him or Sherman or Sheridan or any of them would ever be touched. However, they did get that one Custer when they got a chance, and he was a part of that whole mess. But yeah, you got to look at it with different eyes. You can't look at it with the eyes that say, I completely understand what these people were thinking and feeling as we sit here in our air-conditioned homes in 2023. But you really can't look at it through the eyes of those people today. You can't understand what they were going through until you read some of their personal letters and you understand where they're coming from. And it's not going to come from any Hollywood movie director today, I guarantee you. The last one that got close was John Ford in that one scene in The Searchers. And the fear and the raw emotion on that family when the older daughter starts realizing what's happening and just starts screaming in hysterics. So anyway, that's just my thoughts, and it's probably going to cost me some viewers and subscribers, and I know some people are definitely going to disagree with me down in the comments, but I really don't care. At this point, I've just studied enough history to know your opinion really doesn't matter. My opinion doesn't matter. What matters is what was going on at the time on both sides, and what was written down, and how those people felt. And that's all there is to it. I mean, we can sit back here and armchair quarterback all day long. You'll never know. You'll never know what those people went through. So anyway, that's long and short of it. I've rambled long enough. This is a reply to Plowboy's Ghost's video on 4570 rifles of all things, and I went way down a rabbit hole. So anyway, we will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.